Hi, I'm James McGuire, and on today's eSpeaks, we're talking about the red hot tech job market in which qualified pros are highly sought after and companies have to compete fiercely for top talent. We'll provide advice for job seekers as well as the companies that are trying to hire them. To discuss that, I'm joined by Apratim Purakayastha, Chief Technical Officer at Skillsoft. Apratim, very good to have you with us today.
Thank you. Glad to be here, James.
And I know by you go by the nickname AP, is that true?
Yes, it just makes things much easier.
Very good, very good. So, I'd like to get a sense of your view. What trends do you see most directly driving the tech hiring landscape? Certainly, we know it's a tight job market out there. I'm amazed by the tech professionals I know. They say to me they get a couple of job offers a week. They have a good job and they're still getting constant job offers. So we know it's tight. What do you see driving the job market?
Actually, thanks for the question. I see that as a CTO myself, the challenges of retention, right? I see there are few factors. I'll name about 4 factors. There are multiple, but the top 4 in my mind are post-pandemic, there is a flexibility of work location. Suddenly, the labor market or resource market that a company can access has increased from the radius of 50 miles to a radius of a time zone or 2 time zones, maybe 500, 1,000 miles, right?
Sure.
So the benefit from that, there's a company benefit, but there's a tremendous benefit for flexibility of what opportunities you can pursue as an employee, right? So that actually completely changes the, let's call it your addressable market equation, right? Mm-hmm. So that's one big driver, right? Mm-hmm. The second, clearly, from the point of view of getting 2 job offers a day, is this insatiable demand for technical talent, right? Mm-hmm. It's insatiable because the rate of technology change is very high and it's increasing, it's not decreasing. So even the acceleration is accelerating, right? Mm-hmm. So there's insatiable talent demand, right? So that works in obviously the favor of the employees and the favor of the people in this field, right? Mm-hmm. I think from a company perspective, from an employer perspective, I think DEI and inclusion has become a big issue for a couple of reasons. Number one, much of the tech population is less diverse than it should be, right? Mm-hmm. And secondly, because of global work nature, right? It's not just about ethnicity. You're talking about cultural diversity that comes into an everyday meeting, right? Mm-hmm. So just to be effective and having good collaboration, DEI and inclusion has become a big issue. It's a driver of the market overall, right? From an employer perspective. And the pandemic, we can't forget that, right? Mm. There are some people who just want change. They are sick and tired of same place, same job, same this, same desk, same window, right? Mm-hmm. There's a hunger for change, and not all of the decisions will be good, but there's certainly a hunger for change, right? From an individual perspective. So I think these are the top 4 factors, in my opinion, that I see from my vantage point, driving the hiring landscape overall.
Interesting. Okay. So let's look at it from the employer's perspective. Obviously, they're really, as you mentioned, they're hungry for talent. What advice would you give to companies that need to hire tech talent? And of course, it's a tough market. How can they win in that tight job market?
Great question. Well, first I will say, train to grow and retain, so that you don't have to hire externally. Hiring externally is costly and risky, both at the same time, right? Mm-hmm. So the first advice I would give you about tech employers and tech managers is train, grow, retain. Mm-hmm. The second advice is coach, mentor, manage, because only growing people technically is not the best outcome, right? You have to give people career paths, you have to give people coaching, you have to give people mentorship, right? So coaching, mentoring, and good management. So therefore, beefing up the management skills of your technology management team is very important as well, right? Mm. Then broader trends, flexibility and global, right? Clearly, the trend I was talking about, if you increase your hiring radius with, from 50 miles to a workable time zone, it becomes 500 miles, right? Or 600 miles, right? Then, your addressable, addressable employee market increases, right? So flexibility and then going global is also, important in general, right? Um, and then something that you might not expect actually, it has to do with the technology itself.
Hmm.
Modernize your tech stack, right?
Hmm.
If you're a company working on a 30-year-old tech stack or 20-year-old tech stack, you are by definition a difficult talent market, right?
No
So
one wants to work on the legacy gear, it
modernizing
seems like.
your tech stack not only improves your product, but also improves your value as an employer, right?
Right.
People want to work on certain new technologies versus some older technologies.
Mhm.
So those are my 3, 4 pieces of, if you may call it, insights as to employers that I want to offer.
Sure. One of those points, if I'm hearing you correctly, it sounds like you're advising companies to take somewhat more of a holistic view of the employee to nurture them along, not just treat them as a cog in the wheel, but actually, coach their entire self, if I'm hearing it correctly.
Yeah, there's a difference between training and growing. Train them to
Right.
do something specific, grow them to do something that you can't anticipate right now.
Do you think the companies are doing okay in that area? I mean, it's a newer area for companies. Are they embracing it, understanding it?
And the answer is it depends and varies, like anything else. I think we have customers who are looking at us to help them in this
Mhm.
area because we provide copious amounts of technology training. There are some companies who are ahead of the curve, right? They anticipate the needs. They're looking at cohort transformation, workforce transformation, right? They're in deep discussions with us, how to plan, how to do this, how to do that. Some companies are still reactive. They're a little bit shell shocked, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it runs the gamut, to be honest, James. Right?
Mm.
It runs the gamut, to be honest.
Well, then let's turn our attention to those job seekers out there. They're in the hot seat. They're people want them. Uh, Say there's an individual, he or she is going for their best possible position in the tech market. What advice would you give them to score the best job?
In fact, the first advice would be a mirror image of the advice to the employers.
Hmm.
Um, you don't have to leave to grow, right?
Hmm.
So staying in a company and growing in a different way, right? Maybe in a different technology area, different management area, is fundamentally less risky if you don't have a big problem with the company, right?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
you don't have to leave to grow, right? So I think it's fundamentally less risky. There may be an easier path to growth. So I think that's the first advice I'll tell you. How can you make yourself more attractive for internal mobility opportunities,
Hmm.
right? So along with that comes the second advice, which is make learning a priority. That applies to both internal mobility and external mobility, right? You can learn wherever you are. I think that the tone has changed from doing the job. Doing the job could be 75 to 80% of the time that you spend, but 20% of your time you have to train to do the next job that you want to do, right?
Hmm.
Learn. So learn while you do the job, when you perform the job. I think learning is becoming as important as performing, right?
Hmm.
Because you always have to be future proof yourself, right? The third advice I will give to typically a technology professional is focusing on technology is great, but just focusing on technology is not going to make you successful as a whole contributor to a complex company that is global and working globally. So things like agile, things like digital transformation,
Hmm.
things like diversity and inclusion, especially cross-cultural geography, will help you develop as a much more valuable employee overall to a company, not necessarily just focused on deep technical skills, although that has to be taken for granted.
Well, I think it's been true for years that a technologist who also has business skills and who also has interpersonal skills, those are the people that are really sought after. You have the technology, business, and personal skills. Those are the big winners in the tech market.
Absolutely, but it's slight color change on that. Those
Hmm.
skills were sought after for technology managers and glowing directors, etc. Right? What I'm saying is it's actually become more essential for the individual contributor, the architect, the programmer, because at any one day they're working with a woman in Philippines
Hmm.
and somebody from Bogota, Colombia, right?
Hmm.
So that kind of interpersonal skills, that kind of inclusivity in your own mind has become very important, not just for people who want to grow in management.
It's a small world these days. I mean, just
Small
the
world.
geographic spaces have shrunk down. We have to be able to get along with pretty much anyone.
Yes, sir, this is.
So let's look specifically at what are the biggest skill gaps in the tech market, and what certifications are the most profitable? If we really get down to the brass tacks here, what makes job seekers some extra cash?
Of course, we see 4 or 5 key areas, right? Because Skillsoft just published this Lean into Learning report. I may send you a copy if you have not seen it. There's a lot of data there, but
Sure.
to boil it down, right? I'll tell you 5 skill areas that are significant demand that we see both from our customer interviews and usage. In no particular order, cybersecurity, given the threats to security and given that it's a top level board topic, it's a big area of growth for technology employees. Cloud computing, needless to say, everything's going to the cloud and it's going to stay there for a while, right? So the cloud, cloud transformation is a big deal for every company. So that's a big sought after skill. Analytics and big data, because I don't think there's any board in the technology world and other world that are going to make decisions without copious amount of data and analytics, right? And that goes all the way from product design to business strategy decision making, right? Analytics and data. It's a little hackneyed, but AI and machine learning is going to be important, right? For a long time to come. It has been important for the last 3-4 years. It'll be important for the next 10, right?
Even more so, I would guess. Yeah.
Even more so. And last but not the least, systems and solution architects, because we are putting together complex systems with other complex systems to create derivative systems, right? So it's basically building up software with complex enough piece parts, right? So having systems and solution architecture skills broadly still is very important. So I think we see those 5 areas to be really rising to be very important skill areas. As far as certifications are concerned, if you ask me to name the top one, it's cloud certifications. They're the most valuable, right?
Not at all vendor specific, but just cloud specific.
Just cloud specific, but clearly there's the top 2 and then there's the others, right? We see from our vantage point, Amazon and Microsoft certifications being highly sought after. Just because their market footprint and positions. Up and coming is Google and Oracle and other cloud providers.
Right. On a related note, I was at a conference this past week. It's a Women in Technology conference in San Francisco. Fascinating event, great event. And I was talking to the president of the organization, and she said to me that for women in technology, they're very concerned with the work-life balance. In terms of growing their career, if they're looking for a company to work for, they want that work-life balance. Has that been your experience with women in the workplace, or what is your take on that?
So first I'll quote a stat, right? I have 2 daughters. I want more women in the workplace, especially in the STEM areas, right? There's still a dearth, right? I run a global technology team and I have less women than I should, statistically speaking, right? And that's been a continuous effort to fix. And clearly, somehow the life part of life somehow still falls more on women than men. And women are more challenged by the classical notion of work-life balance. It was actually more accentuated by the pandemic when the kids did not go to school and the women and the partner of the person is still at home. So it was like a crowd, and it was really, really challenging for, it's acute, right? But I think things might grow a little better because there are 2 things that are happening. Number one, we still believe that kids will physically go back to school much more than they've been before, right? So that's back to quote unquote normal, which is great.
Right.
But on the positive side, what will happen is companies are wisening up to more flexibility for the employees, including women, in terms of time at office, time at home, time wherever you're digitally connected. So I think that will work in favor of what I call work-life continuum, not necessarily work-life balance. Because one thing with digitization that happens is the distance between work and life slows down. So kind of narrows down. So I would think of more like work-life continuum rather than work-life balance.
Interesting. Okay. I'd like to get your sense of the future of tech hiring. If you look in your crystal ball and you look, say, a couple of years out, 2, 3, 4 years out, what do you expect over the next coming years in terms of the future of technology hiring?
Good question.
A hard question, because it also influences the economy, plays a role in that. And I'm sort of asking you to be an economic predictor too, Apratim. I don't think it's fair of me, but okay.
Absolutely, I'll try my best, right? But first of all, it's not slowing down, right? It's not going to slow down. If at all, it'll accelerate the pace
Right.
of tech hiring.
Right.
I think it'll be reading, writing, arithmetic, and coding, right? That's the world that we are getting to, right? I think there will be a new sectors that will be more acutely hiring tech from an economic point of view. So, for example, energy sector, agriculture sector, sustainability sector. A lot of their outcomes will be driven by AI, machine learning, and software, right? So I think these sectors that were not traditionally tech sectors will open up much more techy and much more softwarey and et cetera, right? So I think economically, those big sectors will open up as big opportunities for tech hiring. From a technology trend perspective, I think low code, no code will become bigger because everybody cannot be a coder if everybody has to write programs in a low level language, right?
Right.
So higher level abstractions, low code, no code, Lego blocks for coding, that'll become bigger. I think it'll take some time, but AR and VR will become bigger than it is today, right? Every museum will have a VR experience. It has to, right? Along with the physical experience.
Well,
right?
that's the metaverse in a sense, is what you're talking about.
So I think it'll take some time for adoption, right?
Yeah.
But it will become bigger and bigger. Just like 10 years ago, this video conference would be a rare thing, right?
Right.
Now it's the expected thing, right? So
Sure.
these things take time, but so I think I must say that programming will different levels will become more and more important, and like we made a recent announcement for an acquisition Code Academy, and I think that kind of training for the masses of programming will become forever more important. And programming not in the geeky sense, but just in the logical sense of programming.
Right. Interesting. Apratim, I think you said it. It's a lot of really interesting stuff, a lot of important stuff that people need to hear. Thank you so much for sharing your insights today.
And thank you for giving me an opportunity, James. Best of luck.